Hello and welcome to episode 7 of FinTales with me, your host Andy Duncan, a podcast brought to you by FinLingo.com, home of the online analyst app web tool designed to generate infinite quality questions to help you pass financial analysis exams. Check out our website for more details. This morning I'll be speaking with Alberto Mingardi, who is the Director General and co-founder of the Istituto Bruno Leoni, Italy's leading free market think tank. He's also an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute in the United States. We'll be talking about Italy's recent constitutional referendum and possibly the potential upcoming banking crisis, which might also engulf Italy. Buongiorno, Alberto.
Hi, very nice to talk with you, Andy.
You're in Washington at the moment. How's things over there?
Well, I think it's very interesting to see how people are reacting to the Trump presidency. It is my perception that, in a way, conservatives and Republicans have both won and lost with Trump winning the election. They won clearly because they defeated Hillary Clinton. They lost because, for most of them, Trump was not the candidate of their liking. But to my surprise, people are quite hopeful about the transition and the extent to which the new administration will be able to cut on red tape and regulation, which is good news. But of course, we need to wait to see that happening.
Yeah, let's see. Getting back to Italy, now the Italian referendum has been seen as being a bit of the kind of Trump movement or the Brexit anti-globalist movement worldwide. It's been 3 days as we speak since the Italian referendum. Just for some of our listeners who might not be fully up to speed with what it was about, can you just describe what the Italian referendum was all about?
Yes, of course. I mean, the Italian constitution was conceived right after the Second World War as basically a compromise between different political forces with very, very different aims. So in many ways, the Constitution was initially conceived as to avoid the risk of a dictatorship emerging on the left or a dictatorship coming back from the right. In this sense, the Italian Constitution, in a way, is so much about checking and balancing government power with a whole bunch of different features that have been considered by many Italian political leaders as extremely counterproductive, at least in the current age. So we had a number of attempts in the last few years to change the Italian constitution, at least in the second part, in order to make a government a little bit leaner and more conducive. The last attempt was led by Mr. Renzi, the soon-to-be former Prime Minister of Italy. Renzi has put together a reform that was in no way, a tremendous change, but that basically aimed at fixing some bugs, so to say, in the Italian constitution. Most notably, Italy has two chambers, a Senate and a Chamber of Deputy, that do exactly the same things, and they both have a confidence vote on the government. So Renzi put together a reform. This reform was not, a grand change of the Italian constitution, but it was advertised as such by Renzi in a very long electoral campaign that lasted basically 6 months, after which Renzi was defeated, roughly speaking, 60% to 40%.
Now, we have seen with Brexit, it was 52% to 48%, so there's been lots of controversy since then, but 60-40 is a fairly clear mandate. What are the consequences, do you think, of the no vote?
Well, just comparing for a second the Italian referendum and Brexit, let me stress just a couple of things. First of all, in a way, they're two opposite stories. I mean, Brexit is certainly producing a constitutional breach, if you want to call it this way. The Italian referendum is basically producing the status quo to stay put. And the second thing is that Brexit was not predicted by many pollsters. The Italian referendum, with the no side winning, was predicted basically by all pollsters. So in a way, we've been used, we got used to the response of the people before the response of the people came. I think there's a bunch of different consequences, political and economic, if you want to call them that way. When it comes to the political consequences, the biggest problem is related to a very, one of those Byzantine technical things that are so frequent in Italian politics. Mr. Renzi approved a new electoral law a few months ago, but this new electoral law was approved only for the Chamber of Deputies, on the presumption that the constitutional reform was to be ratified by voters, and therefore there won't be needed to have a new electoral law for the Senate, since with the constitutional reform, the Senate was to become an assembly that was indirectly elected, basically an assembly that was elected by regional government, just to put it rather bluntly. So after the no side winning the referendum, Italy has two sharp different electoral laws, one for the Senate, one for the Chamber. That per se, may be acceptable if it was not the case that both the Senate and the Chamber have to have a confidence vote over the government. So what may happen if we rush to elections would be that we may have two sharply different majorities, one in the Chamber and one in the Senate. This is the reason why the President of the Republic is strongly pushing for parties basically to work out a new electoral law which is homogeneous for the Chamber and the Senate. In the current situation, everybody is freaking out at the perspective of the five-star movement, the Italian Podemos, if you want a fitting comparison. Everybody is horrified at the perspective of the five-star movement winning the election, which is not a remote possibility because they command something like the 30% of the votes. So the most likely output of the negotiation among parties for a new electoral law is going to be a pure proportional representation system. Italy had a pure proportional representation system until the early 90s. That was the electoral system that allowed for the production of the gigantic Italian public debt. There was an electoral system that allowed basically for a massive transactional politics and, very, very unfortunately successful attempt to buy consensus with public spending. A pure proportional representation system is such that, of course, governments are made in the parliament, so to say. They're the result of parliamentary dealing, which means that everybody will be bringing its own veto powers. Every party will be bringing its own veto powers to the table. And that will make reforming Italy, which is already a pretty daunting task, an almost impossible one. So that's going to be the most relevant political consequence of the referendum. This has nothing to do, with the fact that the Renzi reform was better than the status quo, was worse than the status quo. This is a pure political, very likely consequence of what happened. Italy may go back into even more of a political mud.
Now, I've often studied people like Marius and Sulla and Caesar, and Italian politics can get very confusing. But we've got Matteo Salvini of the Northern League, and we've got Beppe Grillo of the Five Stars movement. Both have indicated that they're anti-Euro. Do you think that they could get together in some kind of alliance, and if there are early elections in that alliance, take Italy out of the Euro?
Well, I think this will be very unlikely for this reason. The Northern League used to be a secessionist party of the north of Italy. Nowadays, the Northern League was transformed by Mr. Salvini, who, as a matter of fact, is a very effective politician. He picked up his party when he was scoring 40% of the votes. Now the party is scoring 16%, so he quadrupled the party's consent. Mr. Salvini's party is basically a nationalist right-winger party. It is really the Italian equivalent of the French Front National now. Mr. Grillo party's five-star movement, on paper, is not ideological. The only thing that the five-star people have is a method. Their internet platform is called Rousseau. Their idea is that politicians should act on a clear mandate by their constituents. And their constituents are not Italian at large, but they're the members of the five-star movement. So on paper, what they preach is an internet version of direct democracy. But when you look at their proposals in the parliament, and when you look at the biographies of their political class, well, all of them, virtually all of them, come out of the extreme left. So the Northern League is, if you want, a right-wing nationalist party. The political class of the Five Star Movement resembles an extreme left-wing party. So it would be very difficult for, the political apparatuses of these two different groups to get together and contrive some sort of alliances. Also, Salvini is still in favor of quitting the euro. Grillo has stopped speaking about that for quite a while. Quitting the common currency, whatever is your opinion on that possibility, is clearly a very complicated business that requires, on the one hand, a good expertise on the part of the political class running the experiment, and on the other hand, it will require, some sort of complicity by the civil service and extensive negotiations in Brussels. I think that Mr. Grillo, who is likely to be somehow, in control of the Italian government in a few years, if not months, it's a real possibility that they may win elections. I think Mr. Grillo understands he doesn't have quite the human capital within his own party and the expertise in deal making that such a scenario would require.
Now, we've seen a similar kind of thing in the UK with Brexit, which was 52%, 48%, and an unwilling civil service. And it could take years before Brexit actually happens, if it ever happens at all. So if we just assume that Italy is going to stay in some kind of stasis, can we move on to the banks, the Italian banking situation? So we have Banca Monte dei Paschi di Siena, which I think is the third largest bank in Italy and the oldest bank in the world, and the 7 other major banks. These banks are all close to failure. Now, Mr. Renzi, the Prime Minister, has been asked by Sergio Mattarella, the President, to stay on to look after financial things. Do you think Mr. Renzi is going to bail out these Italian banks in some way or other to prevent an Italian banking crisis collapsing the euro economy?
It won't be Mr. Renzi. I mean, Mr. Renzi has been asked to keep on going to approve the budget law, and that will be done quite quickly. Mr. Renzi, at this stage, understandably, wants to quit government to take care of his own party, I would say somehow to purge his own party and to recover in the expectation of elections happening basically in the next 10, 12 months. It needs to be remembered that he lost the referendum, but arguably Mr. Renzi got a tremendous number of votes as opposed to the historical record of the left in Italy. I think that the next government, who's ever going to be the leader, will have to do something for the Italian banking crisis, which is now first and foremost Monte dei Paschi di Siena, MPS. The situation could be summarized in the following way. Italian banks, as compared with other banks in the Eurozone, on average, have less capital. They have more non-performing loans, and they're more exposed to sovereign debt, to Italian sovereign debt. So their fate is really intertwined with the fate of Italian public finance, particularly at this moment. Mr. Renzi, as you may remember, was a great champion of flexibility versus the European Union. Flexibility is a very elegant way of putting, the request for having budget deficits and getting more in debt, which is something that unfortunately was made rational for a political leader by quantitative easing that has sharply reduced the incentive to have structural reform all over the Eurozone. So all in all, I think Mr. Renzi has increased permanent outlay by something like 1 percentage point of GDP. So he was certainly not an austerity prime minister. Renzi has mingled quite a bit with the banking situation, and the Italian government has been extremely so to say, interventionist in the sense that he did the deal making for Monte dei Paschi di Siena for MPS. So, whereas, of course, I mean, on paper, in theory, you could have MPS practicing a bail-in. That's very unlikely to happen. And the government is going to be getting in one way or another. Of course, saying that he's doing that to protect Italian savings and all of that. It is very important to remember that Italy, unfortunately, even after banks were privatized in the early 90s, has a very strong tradition of political intervention in the banking system. Banks are controlled by bank foundations, where the board is appointed by different political bodies. But when it comes to Monte dei Paschi di Siena was a hugely politicized bank. Its leadership was always having a special relationship with the Communist Party, which is now the Democratic Party of the left. This is something that has much to do with the way in which credit was allocated in a apparently not very successful way. But when it comes to non-performing loans, there is another great responsibility on the part of Italian politics, which is the fact that, a good chunk of the problem with non-performing loans in Italy is related with the tremendous inefficiency of our judiciary system. A slow and untrustworthy judiciary like the Italian one is making very, very difficult to recover out of bad credit.
Now, we see that about $350 billion in non-performing loans is the current Italian banking credit figure, which I think is about 20% of total lending. And in the last day or two, the Italian government has said that it will be doing a debt-for-equity swap with MPS. And also in the last day or two, we've seen the ECB pledge to buy up Italian government debt. So maybe they are going to paper over these financial cracks in the short term at least. Can I just ask you, what do you think the situation will be like in Italy in, say, 1 year's time?
I tend to stick with the old Yogi Berra saying, which is it's difficult to make prediction, particularly about the future. I think Italy is in a very dangerous position. The five-star movement began as basically a protest movement. It was denunciating the corruption of the Italian establishment, and for some good reason. I mean, it's as it happens, when so-called populists take sides against establishments being corrupt, they have very often very sound argument. But the party has been growing steady, and now it commands, roughly speaking, 1/3 of the votes. The interesting thing is that these votes, at least to the best of my understanding, are not cast by people that believe, that buy into the party agenda of direct democracy, but they're just cast by Italians who are fed up with the political establishment, do not like Mr. Renzi's left, and of course on the right there is not really a credible alternative available at the moment. So the five-star movement has a chance of winning election, particularly if elections will be going through a system with a second round. Whenever the five-star movement was, having a second round against Renzi's party, the five-star movement has won in local election. If they do win election, we will witness a tremendous experiment in political adventurism, and we may have, something extremely painful coming up. Also, because it's a party with a very strong anti-business attitude. The drama in Italy is that the country has had sluggish, if not negative, growth for too many years. The immigration crisis, of course, is creating social tensions and conflict, particularly in suburbs of great cities, but not just there. The country has kept afloat so far because it's still the third largest economy in the Eurozone. It has a terrific entrepreneurial class, some first-class businesses, The north of Italy has been one of the richest areas in Europe ever since the 14th century. So it has a creation, and it has an experience, it has a tradition in wealth creation, but crazy regulation and extremely high taxes are strangling the economy, and they have been strangling the economy for 20 years now. So the Italian situation could really explode, and people like Mr. Renzi are likely to be remembered by history as politician that had a unique opportunity of stopping the rise of populists by reforming the country, and spectacularly failed.
Sounds like Pompey the Great versus Caesar. So if you were a betting man then, unlike Mr. Yogi Bear, if you're a betting man, what do you think the chances are of Italy, say, being outside the Euro, outside the EU in the next 5 years because of this explosion of populism?
Well, I don't think that you can have the Euro and Italy outside the Euro. I think if things arrive to the point of Italy quitting the Euro, what you see is basically the collapse of a common currency, or the making of 2 euros, one for the northern countries and one for the Latin countries, which I do not really know if it makes much sense, but it's an idea which has been around for quite a while. Italians used to be extremely Europhile for good reasons. I mean, they thought Brussels may be awful, but it's going to be better than Rome in governing us. Now Euroscepticism is clearly growing in the country, but I think that quitting Euro membership is still too much. It is something that will not gain much consensus. But if we really get towards a situation in which the country is in dire straits, and if, of course, the European Union continues to be as conducive, as effective, and as credible as it is these days, a more likely scenario is a breakup of the Eurozone. Of course, in two kind of Euro A and Euro B, with plenty of problems, because it's certainly terra incognita, and we don't know how things would work with the ECB, with the percentage of the debt that has been already neutralized, and so on and so forth.
So there could be a Deutschmark euro and a Lira euro.
Of course, in this scenario, the Deutschmark euro and the Lira euro, a possibility, not very likely, but a possibility, may be a breakup of Italy itself. If you think about their economies, clearly Milan and its region are far more homogeneous with Bavaria than with Naples and its region. So if we're going to be having a Euro Lira and a Euro Deutschmark, an interesting question will be, to which euro does the north of Italy belong?
Well, it's been fascinating speaking with you this morning, Alberto, and you've clarified a great deal of things for me on the Italian situation. Can you just tell our listeners some websites or some places where they can get hold of information about you and your work?
Yes, please visit www.brunoleoni, BRUNOLEONI.org. That's the website of Istituto Bruno Leoni. Istituto Bruno Leoni is a free market think tank. It produces studies, researches on the Italian economy, and particularly on market openness and liberalizations and welfare reform in Italy. But at the very same time, I hope Istituto Bruno Leoni is a positive agent for economic alphabetization in Italy. I think if more Italians would understand what the opportunity cost is, they would be less likely to do dreadful choices when it comes to pick up their politicians.
Well, whatever happens, I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating time in Italy in the next few years. Thank you very much for your time today, Alberto. Arrivederci e grazie.
Thank you, Andy.
Here at FinLingo.com, we've built the Analyst App web app to generate infinite questions to help busy people pass difficult financial analysis exams like the CFA. With a game-like environment and solutions with full mathematical equations, you'll find it's the easiest way to get those financial qualifications you need for your incredible career in finance. Now available on your web browser, your tablet or your smartphone. Just go to FinLingo.com to find out more and to get your free activation link, which gives you completely full access to Analyst App until the end of this month. Here on FinTales, we're going to keep exploring the global financial system from a pure free market and Austrian economics position to uncover the underlying reality behind the headlines of the mainstream media. If you have any topics you'd like us to cover, just go to FinLingo.com, scroll down and drop us a line. In the meantime, and until next time, goodbye.